Greetings, Nick Bocott from Sweetwater here, and I'd like to introduce you to my special friend from Cuba. He's the bass player, allegedly, and I'm not going to tell you who he's played for, because if you don't know, you're obviously from another planet, and the bottom line it would be quicker for me to mention the bands he hasn't played for than those he has. But the reason he's here is we're here to celebrate the life of Randy Rhoads, the late, great, highly influential to this day Randy Rhoads. And this man not only knew Randy as a friend, he played in both bands that Randy's renowned for, Quiet Riot and of course Ozzy Osbourne. So without further ado, Rudy, thanks for taking the time.
Great to be here, and thank you for doing this for Randy. I mean, this is anytime that myself, yourself, and everybody else from that knew Randy or is a fan of Randy, when we speak on his behalf, it carries his name forward, in his memory. I do these events called Randy Rhoads Remember just for that, and thank you again.
Well, the funny thing is, I have the honor of teaching here at Sweetwater, and a lot of my students are young kids, and the people I teach the most stuff from, believe it or not, it's not the new bands, it's Eddie Van Halen,
yes,
it's Dimebag, and Randy.
Yeah. What was it like for you growing as a guitar player? What influence did Randy have on you?
The weird thing was, I'll be honest with you, the first time I heard Randy was on Crazy Train. My bass player, the Grim Reaper's bass player, was a huge Ozzy nut, so he brought Crazy Train, and I heard the tapping and went, that's cool, but Eddie does that. But then I went to see the band live. I saw the first tour, the Blizzard of Ozz tour, and I was like this.
That would have been with Lee and Bob.
Yeah.
Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley.
I was literally, my mouth was ajar. Yeah. I couldn't believe what I saw, because he brought, Daryl put it best. Dimebag said, Eddie's rock and roll, but Randy was heavier. There was something, Randy was more heavy metal, but he brought that classical influence, and he was so schooled but passionate at the same time. Mm-hmm. So, and the fact I got to work with Max Norman, which was a huge privilege, and I used to bug him for hours about. Yeah. He doubled the solos. No, he normally tripled them. One down the middle, two. It's like, what?
Yeah. We used to do demos back in the Quiet Riot days. We were going like the record plant in LA on spec time, which is like after midnight. If somebody canceled a session, you would go in there. And he would do that. He would usually bring, because at the time, he didn't have the money to buy a Marshall stack.
Right.
So his on-stage amplifier was a PV head.
Right.
With an Ampeg cabinet with like six speakers that were either Altec or JBL. I always get them confused, but they had the silver cone.
Right. I know he
which
used
later
Altex.
He had those in the Marshalls.
Altex, yeah.
What were they?
They were Altex.
Altex, okay. And it was so loud. Really, just one cab. We used to play, either the Starwood or the Whiskey a Go-Go or some of the local venues, But in the studio, he would bring a Champ, little Fender Champ amp, and just plug that in, and it sounded just pretty much like his stage sound.
Now, how did you meet Randy?
How did I meet Randy? In 1978, I was living in New Jersey and getting ready to go back to Los Angeles, because I had, been working out there playing lounge bands with my brother. We had a lounge act, and my sister-in-law. And so I moved back to LA. I was planning on going back, and I get this phone call from Kevin saying, "Hey man, he remembered me from meeting him at the Starwood, which was like the local place where Quiet Riot was basically a house band there." And I met him, and I told him when I seen Quiet Riot for the first time, how much on track they were, because they were really they had a vision. They were a arena band playing in a club.
Right.
So they projected, and Randy had this following, all these girls, they just standing in front of him, and they all wore the little bow ties.
Right. Like so he was doing it back then, the bow tie stuff.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, he got rid of the bow tie when he joined Ozzy.
Right.
But yeah, that's where the bow tie started. And that later on became part of the inlays on his Carl Sandoval guitar.
Yeah,
so he kept that until Ozzy. This is pretty much an Ozzy guitar. The Flying V Carl Sandoval with the polka dots. That was a Quiet Riot design guitar at the time, And so Kevin remembered me, and they tried everybody in town. All the bass players.
Right.
And somebody kept saying, you should, get a hold of this guy, Rudy. So he called me up, and I just happened to be going back to LA the following week. So I went in, I auditioned, and it was fantastic. We actually, basically, we jammed to Johnny Winter songs.
Really?
Yeah, Randy was like doing all these crazy pentatonic blues, but also with more outside of the box playing,
Right,
not
so
just
the
sticking to
classical
pentatonics,
influence?
you know, some classical,
Right.
using the melodic minor and, harmonic minor scales and all that. So it was very, very unique style of playing.
So you kind of knew right from the get-go that there was something special about the guy.
Oh yeah, I knew. Well, I knew it before I joined the band because
Right.
I was a fan before I joined the band. So
Right.
to have the opportunity to play with these guys, I knew I knew I was onto something really cool.
Right.
But at that time, by the time I did that version of Quiet Riot, punk and new wave were really huge,
Right.
and record companies were not really interested in what we were doing. Now, meanwhile, on your side of the pond, you guys were coming up with the new wave of metal.
Yeah.
LA didn't even know about it. The industry, the music industry,
Right.
they didn't even care. They didn't care that Iron Maiden, Motorhead, you guys
Right.
were the future. So Randy had to actually leave LA, go join Ozzy to become part of the new wave of metal, to actually become the legend that he is today.
Yeah, because the staggering thing about Randy is the fact that, and this is a sad fact, he passed away, he was taken from us when he was 25.
Mm-hmm.
That was nearly 36 years ago. So he's been gone a decade longer than he was alive, but his shadow doesn't just remain, it grows.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that fascinates me. And if you look at his body of work, it's relatively small. 2 studio albums with Ozzy, the Quiet Riot stuff, and the live album, of course. But it's endured, it's not only withstood the test of time, it's actually grown because his influence.
Yeah.
I teach kids, and that's what they want to learn.
But the fortunate thing was that we played a lot.
Right.
We toured a lot. In that, I joined the band in 1981, March of 1981, April, and he passed away the following year, March 19. But within that almost a year period, I stayed with the band longer after he passed away to finish, complete all the committed to, touring that we had signed up to do. He played in front of so many people, and it's that memory, like you watching him for that time, the impact.
Yeah.
He had major impact, that was, to me, that transcended what's on the record. Because one thing is what you hear on the record, and to actually watch him play it live, that's a whole different experience.
Yeah, that actually goes back to what I said, is I heard the record and went, yeah, it's pretty cool, but I've heard that already. And then when I saw him, I was just like, wow. And I actually got to meet him on the Diary of a Madman tour, and that was fascinating because he's such a diminutive, polite guy. But I was friends with John Thomas from Budgie.
Yes.
And Budgie opened for Ozzy on that first tour, and John and Randy became really close, so they'd go on each other's buses and travel places. Randy would go stay at John's place, and John always said to me, if you ever meet Randy, just tell him you're a friend of JT's. So we played a show in Bristol. Our lighting rig went to the Ozzy tour, which was cancelled after 2 dates because of a divorce. But I got to watch the sound check, and it was still with Lee and those guys at the time, but they played Diary of a Madman without Ozzy. And when Randy walked off, I was just like, I've got to say something. So I said, hey, I'm a big fan. I just want to say John from Budgie says hi. He went, JT? And then we had a 15-minute conversation, and I had all these questions I wanted to ask Randy. And all he said to me, he says, if you're a friend of John's, you must be a guitar player. What do you use? What pickups? What order you pick? Why you have this pedal here? Yeah. He asked me question after question after question. I could see the tour manager getting kind of antsy. So I said, look, been a pleasure. I got to go meet some people. The tour manager went, thank you, because he's got to go to an interview. Yeah. And we walked away, and I went, wow, I just met Randy Rhoads, and I didn't get to ask him a single question because he just grilled me about my rig. It was fascinating, but that's the impression I got. And then working on the guitars with Jackson, and also the amps with Marshall, to meet Dolores and the family, Kelly, his sister, just wonderful people, and there's this synergy that, like, the feeling at Musonia when you actually go into Randy's room, which is just left as it is, it's like there's a vibe there that's it's hard to imagine or describe until you actually go in that room. But I think you know what you talk about. There's a spirit that still lives there. I think.
Yeah, definitely. I got to spend a lot of time with Musoni because he asked me to become the bass teacher while we were still in Quiet Riot.
Oh, right, okay.
So I had the room right next to him, and I learned a lot from him. Because I had never taught before, and so I asked him, "Give me some advice here," and he says, "Well, do this," which is what he used to do. Like the kids were already into like Van Halen,
right?
But also they were Randy fans. That's why they went to him as a teacher, And so he would say, "Okay." So he told me just do a little bargaining with them. Say, "Okay, what do you want to learn? You want to learn the solo from a Van Halen song? Okay, if you do that, you must also learn these new scales." So he would give him something that would be relative to show why certain things were from the song. Because one thing is to teach somebody something, another thing is to explain why that is working in the song so you can apply that to your own creations.
It's almost like they give a man a fish, you can feed him, give him a rod and teach him how to fish, he can feed himself forever.
Exactly.
Yeah, same. That's a great, I've never heard that story before.
Yeah, so I was able to apply that to my own lessons,
The one fascinating thing about Randy, and I hope you can give us insight, is that if you listen, like Blizzard of Ozz and Diary were recorded relatively close to each other.
Within weeks, months.
But there's an evolution sonically and musically.
Totally.
How do you think that came about?
I believe that this is what happened. When Randy joined Ozzy, he did not know what to expect as far as the freedom to be creative.
Right.
And Ozzy told him, just be yourself. Of course, being yourself meant that he had already been in a more of a pop, diatonic composition band, such as Quiet Riot. That's what we were going through. Yeah, I mean, there was a huge pop influence that we were going through in in the '70s version of Quiet Riot. All the bands that we were being influenced, even though they had a lot of R&B in it, compositionally, it was not a blues band.
Right.
It was more pop, compositions.
Right.
And so a lot of the music that was being written during the Quiet Riot period was very diatonic.
Right.
I mean, if you break down the structure of, let's say, songs like Mr. Crowley, it's D minor, D minor, F major, D minor.
Right.
Every single chord in that scale, it's in that song.
Relative major, relative minor. Yeah.
In a circle of fourths, especially at the end, during the solo. Going from D minor, to G minor in the key of F major, right? If you listen to Goodbye to Romance, D major, again, every single chord, right?
Right.
So Crazy Train is A major, starting in F minor, relative minor, right? Every single chord is written about that. So he took that, that was good. And it was iconic songs were written like that, but he wanted more. So by the time he started working on Diary, especially Diary of a Madman. I asked him, where'd you get the inspiration for this? Because this is really outside the box.
Yeah, it is.
And he says, well, I was watching a documentary about the Holocaust, and the soundtrack inspired him to write a song with that sort of feel and sound to it, the chord structures. I have talked to people that actually were able to pinpoint the music from that documentary.
Really?
Yeah, I can't recall who it is, but it's actually, they say, yes, you're right, there is a certain Holocaust documentary where this composer wrote this soundtrack, and that's where Randy was inspired from. Yeah. So if you listen to like Believer and all those songs, especially once it comes to the solo, he really breaks away from any tone, the actual tone center.
Right, no, which is fascinating.
Yeah, very fascinating. I mean, all the solos just become like their own little pieces, composition, very melodic too.
Yeah, he always wrote songs within a song. That's what I love about his solos, like the Brian May kind of vibe.
Exactly.
So that's fascinating. So really, Diary was a more true representation of what Randy was really thinking once he'd got that freedom of knowing that when Ozzy said you've got carte blanche, he literally meant it.
Yes, because I mean, they had to compose in a hurry. Right. So Randy, there's a certain pieces of music that were actually kind of like what he was composing during the
Right.
Quiet Riot,
Right.
time in the band. Yeah.
Now, how was it performing live with Randy? Because he always had an X
It's
factor
really
about him.
interesting that, you asked me that question because, of course, what happened from difference between Quiet Riot, Randy Rhoads, and not only musically, as far as composition goes, but his fire,
Right.
his passion, was basically the same.
Right.
From
that makes
from
sense.
Quiet Riot to Ozzy. Let's say the last time we played with Quiet Riot was 1979.
Right.
Yeah. I can even say when it was. It was right before Thanksgiving, 1979. Then he went to England. He spent Thanksgiving in England. And then by 81, we were touring in the States. So you have that very short period of
tiny
two
period,
albums.
yeah.
And the tour with Bob and Lee
Right.
in England.
Yep.
And then we started touring for Blizzard. So it had a huge impact. Once he went to England, he became more of a not LA Sunset Strip musician.
Okay.
He got it. He started becoming more of the new wave of British metal.
Right.
Kind of like Hendrix, when Hendrix left New York.
Yeah, it's
And
funny
from
how that
playing
works
the Cafe
sometimes.
One, all those
Yeah.
gigs, all of a sudden he goes to England and becomes the Hendrix that we know.
Right.
It was the same thing with Randy. I think if Randy would have stayed in LA, we wouldn't imagine him, the image
Right.
of Randy as what's depicted on that shirt. It would have been a whole different Randy Rhoads.
Yeah, because the one thing that I'm sure you've heard it many times too is there's a Mick Ronson-esque look about Randy.
Well, again, we were
English.
all big. We were influenced by '70s bands,
Right.
and yeah, in a way there was. But and the more I get to know about Mick Ronson, I was watching his documentary. Besides Bowie, it's
Right.
called. I got to see the similarities because you don't get to know about Mick Ronson being influenced. He was a composer,
Yeah.
he arranger. He arranged all the music for.
Yeah, do you ever hear his solo albums? They're quite
Yes,
Brilliant.
eclectic, and
Brilliant.
he became a producer and
Yeah.
all of that. And I can see, okay, yeah, they're kind of like the same, birds of a feather, Mick Ronson
figure.
and Randy.
I've got to ask you this. You have a podcast.
Yes, I
It's
do.
called The Dash.
The Dash.
My interpretation of The Dash is, and I got this from a movie. I didn't invent this. I just stole it from someone, which is what I do. I'm a plagiarist, ladies and gentlemen. I steal. But there was this great part in this film. It's called Where Hope Lives, I think, where there's a priest giving a eulogy, and he's in a graveyard, and he says, he's giving this eulogy to this person who's passed, and he said, we're surrounded by hundreds of gravestones. They all have four things in common: a name, a birth date, and a death date. And you can't change those three things. They are what they are. Your name is what you're born with.
Yeah.
You're born when you're born, you pass when you pass. But there is a fourth element, which is the dash between birth and death.
Yeah, exactly.
That represents your life.
Yeah.
And to me, someone like, and I believe the size of someone's dash is dependent on the positive influence they have on others.
Yeah.
And so some people's dashes are longer, deeper, and they're higher than others.
Yeah.
But I also believe that when someone goes to the next place, if they are truly profoundly influential and have a positive impact on people, their dash continues to grow. And I believe that Randy's like the Dimes of this world, the
absolutely.
Hendrixes of this world, even though they've been gone longer than they were alive in two of those cases, their dashes keep growing because the influence in a positive nature they have with people.
Absolutely. The reason why I call it the dash is because or even wanted to do a podcast. It was because I, just like you, we've been going to a lot of our friends' memorials lately.
Yeah.
I was at Lemmy's and Jimmy Bain's, and everybody gets up there and says all these wonderful things, and I'm thinking, wouldn't it be nice to tell the person while they're alive
Yeah, it would
how
be.
you actually feel about them,
Right.
and let the world know how you feel about them, and have it there for history. Yeah, because now we're in the social media age. I mean, imagine if hundreds of years ago, Beethoven, Chopin, Bach, they had a podcast, and they had people would, you'll be able to listen to that and hear their voice or their friends talking with them and say how much they mean to having them in their lives.
Right.
You know, so it's a celebration. You know,
Which that's a great way of putting it. Yeah.
yeah. So, like again, like we were talking, you have the birthday, you got the death date, but it's that dash on your headstone that it's the most important thing. What have you done between this and this? And that's what my podcast celebrates.
celebrate.
And I would love to have you on the podcast sometime.
It would be my honor.
Love to do that.
And the funny thing you said about social media is that you mentioned that Randy's influence had a lot to do with how many people he played in front of. And he had, like I said, he had a profound influence on me when I saw him live. What's amazing is there's so little footage of him, and this is way before social media.
Yeah.
But his impact is so profound to this day. And on a personal note, I want to thank you for being part of the reason why Randy's spirit lives on. Rudy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, my friend. God bless you.